Hello, so this is a video I've decided to make about the history of Europe, how the map and other things have changed through the centuries until today, starting from the year 1700. I'll be showing a map of every 25 years, and you can see what has changed, and I'll explain what has happened between these 25-year intervals. I'll keep it simple to give a general idea of events, and try not to dig into details too much. But I will focus more on the most important things that happened. Alright, so here's the map of Europe in the year 1700. This is what the borders approximately looked like. The first thing one may notice is that it's very complex. It's a mess, really. A lot of this has to do with the fact that many countries that we have today in Europe were at this time in history not united in single nations, but were divided in confederations or smaller kingdoms, states and principalities. For an example is Italy. If we imagine in our minds what Italy looks like today, we can make out the borders on this map. But the Italy in these times was very divided. The reason to why the lower part of Italy is yellow is that it was at this time under control of the Kingdom of Spain, in the form of a personal union. This particular area has been disputed and fought for control over between France and Spain for quite some time, and has been in both hands at some point. However, French efforts to regain control of the territory has become weaker and weaker, until Spanish control is no longer very much endangered. Spain also owned some parts of the Low Countries below the Netherlands in Belgium. Some of the previously owned provinces had earlier revolted and declared independence in the 80 Years' War, forming the Dutch Republic, the Netherlands. Above Spain lies the Kingdom of France, another one of Europe's major powers, and at this time under the reign of Louis XIV, also called the Sun King. He is one of France's most known and greatest monarchs. He reigned for 72 years and 110 days, which is the longest known reign of any European monarch of a sovereign state ever. In what is today Germany, there is at this time a great amount of smaller German states, united with some other countries in the Holy Roman Empire. These states were so many that if I would have tried to draw them, it would have been a nightmare, and for you to look at this map, even worse. So I've simply called the area smaller German states. Prussia was emerging as one of the most powerful of these states and was to become a major European power later on. In the north, the Kingdom of Sweden owns a lot of land in what is today Finland, Estonia and Latvia. Furthermore, they also own a small portion of Upper Germany, called Swedish Pomerania. Norway and Denmark are still united in a personal union since the Swedes left in 1523, shattering it. This union was called the Kalmar Union. In the east, three powerful empires controlled large portions of land: the Russian Empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Ottomans had had much success in conquering the Balkans and had established a major foothold in Europe, which was however from this point forward about to decline, as internal struggle and other European powers would finally bring about the end of the empire. Although weakened by wars with Sweden and Poland-Lithuania in the 16th and 17th centuries, Russia still remained a great power, which was slowly growing stronger. On the British Isles we have England, with Scotland and Ireland as the lesser partners of a personal union with England as the overlord. Austria is at this point in history a great power, ruled by the Habsburg monarchy. They would see much success in the 18th century, but they had much problems with managing their empire. More of this later. In 1725 we can see that the map has changed on some fronts. Sweden unfortunately lost a great deal of land to Russia in the Great Northern War. All the land in the Baltics were Estonia and Latvia today, the Finnish Karelia, and also almost all of Swedish Pomerania to the Prussians after the loss of Stralsund. This began the decline of the Swedish Empire, and the Russian Empire, led by Peter the Great, emerged as the new most powerful northern country. The Austrians had managed to acquire control of Lower Italy, Naples, as well as the Spanish territory in the Belgium region in the War of the Spanish Succession, and also occupied some territory from the Ottomans in the Austro-Turkish War, and seizing the important city of Belgrade from them. The Habsburg monarchy was now a very powerful empire, but it had its problems. First and foremost, it was big, and second, it was very culturally diverse. This made governing the empire quite difficult. Another thing that happened between 1700 and 1725 is the foundation of Great Britain in 1707, now including Scotland as part of their nation. As well as making governing the nation hard for themselves by much territorial expansion in a reasonably short time, making enemies is another great problem with this. In the War for Polish Succession between 1733 and 1735, France and Spain got a chance to halt Austrian expansion. So the war was about who would inherit the throne of Poland. One side wanted Grand Duke Augustus III, and the other wanted Stanislav I. France, Spain, and Sardinia went together and supported Stanislav, while Austria, Russia, Saxony, and Prussia, along with the Holy Roman Empire, went with Augustus. The interesting thing with this war is that both sides won or at least profited from the war in one way or another. The countries that sided with Augustus managed to put him on the Polish throne, while the other side, the French and the Spanish, fulfilled their goal to control the Austrians, taking back Naples and Sicily, establishing them as sovereign states again while under their control. Shortly after this war, another major war broke out, a succession war this time as well, now regarding the throne of Austria. Almost every major European power was involved in this war. Prussia gained control of Silesia and a bit of territory above the Netherlands. Between the years 1756 and 1763, the 7 Years' War was fought between many European powers, much for the control of colonies all around the world, but mostly for Austria's wish to take back Silesia from Prussia. Much of the fighting took place at sea between the rivals Britain and France, where Britain's formidable navy could not be matched, which was the key to their success and later the victory in the war. Prussia, also fighting on Britain's side, also came to define themselves as a powerful nation, much thanks to Frederick II, or Frederick the Great. The result was a great gain of territory in North America for Great Britain, and some for Spain as well. This left Britain as the dominant colonial power in North America. Now having proved their strength at sea, Britain continued its expansion overseas. And between 1769 and 1770, they discovered New Zealand and Australia, which were claimed for Britain by James Cook. In the year 1772, the partitions of Poland began taking place, dividing the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. This happened much as a cause of the War of the Bar Confederation between Russia and the Bar Confederation, which was established by nobles of Poland who wanted to protect the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth against Russian influence. They failed, and the first of 3 partitions of Poland were made. Russia also took advantage of the weakened Ottoman Empire, where revolts were many and successes few, in the Russo-Turkish War from 1768 to 1774. It took some land and made Crimea a puppet state, which was later to be annexed completely. Despite the successes in the war, unrest was growing in Russia, and in 1773 Pugachev's rebellion broke out, demanding the abolition of serfdom. The large rebellion was finally crushed, and serfdom continued to exist in Russia until it was abolished in 1861. Pugachev's rebellion remains one of the largest peasants' revolts in Russia's history. In the year 1800, much of the map in Europe has changed. Neither Poland nor Lithuania exists anymore as sovereign nations, while Austria, Prussia, and Russia sure has benefited much from this, in terms of expansion. Across the Atlantic, in North America, the American War of Independence has resulted in the United States emerging as a sovereign nation after the failure of the British to prevent the very same. But perhaps the most important event is the revolution that has happened in France. In 1789, the people of the French monarchy were suffering greatly through the tremendous hardships that they had to go through as a result of the inefficient reign of Ludwig XVI. France was an absolute monarchy, the king had all the power, and the many problems France had at this time was entirely his responsibility to handle. Among these problems were crop failure and bad harvests, leading to greatly increased food prices and starvation. More problems were enormous national debts and failing economy. Also, the high taxes that were needed to keep France standing on its legs were extremely unfairly distributed between the social classes, lying very largely on the lower classes, peasants, workers, and farmers, and so on, while the upper classes enjoyed wasteful and lavish lives. The most acute problem for the king, however, was the new spread of enlightened ideas for the free people, which thrived in the country where people grew more and more restless about the inequalities of life. Finally, the dissent grew so large that the people of Paris rose up for a massive revolt. Afraid that the state would answer this with violence, they stormed the Bastille, a fortress and also a prison in Paris that contained large quantities of weapons, gunpowder, ammunition, and cannons. The people demanded food and human rights, and the king had no choice but to surrender. After abusing his newly regulated power, the king and later his queen were beheaded in a guillotine, along with many more with opposing opinions in the terror regime under the radical Maximilien de Robespierre. This event shook the other monarchies in Europe, fearing that the same thing could happen to them, And the first coalition, including among others Britain, Austria, the Holy Roman Empire and the Netherlands, was formed against France, trying to crush the revolution and its ideals, and reinstate the old monarchy. It failed, much thanks to the mass conscription that was introduced in France. This was the beginning of the French Revolutionary Wars, and now France went on the offensive, seizing the Lowlands, today's Belgium, the Rhineland between the years 1794 and 1797, as well as having much success in the ambitious General Napoleon's campaign in northern Italy. The Cisalpine Republic, shortened CAR on the map, was formed, a so-called sister republic under France. When the War of the First Coalition ended in 1797 with Austrian surrender, Britain remained at war with France. The end of the 18th century was marked by a new spread of ideas in Europe through France, and when the 19th century began, through its success in repelling its many enemies, a whole new type of society established itself in France, the First French Republic. But the First French Republic was a fairly short-lived one, and in 1804 France was once again ruled by a man with absolute power. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte, and he decided to crown himself as Emperor of the French, creating the First French Empire. In the same year as the world population reaches 1 billion, Napoleon starts his conquest of Europe. In the following years, him and his armies managed to conquer large parts of Europe before he made the fatal decision to invade Russia. After initial stunning success, even taking the capital, Moscow, the problems started to appear. One of them was that the army's stockpiles of food and supplies started to fall short. The Russians had, as they withdrew further into the Russian lands, unable to defeat the Napoleonic army, used a scorched earth tactic. This meant burning and salvaging anything that could be of use to the enemy: shelter, food, supplies, and infrastructure. This, however, was not Napoleon's only problem. Winter was approaching, and his army was not equipped for this. Napoleon had thought the Russian Tsar Alexander I would have made peace when his capital had fallen. This was not the case, however, and eventually Napoleon's armies had to withdraw from Russia, decimated and attrition-ridden. Finally, the European nations managed to defeat Napoleon, exiling him to the island of Elba, from which he although managed to escape. He returns to France where the monarchy has been restored, with the brothers to Louis XVI, Louis XVIII now in power. Napoleon took back the power and built another army. He was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo by the British, and this time he was expelled to the faraway island of St. Helena, where he stayed until his death in 1821. His name remains controversial still today. While being seen as a power-hungry warmonger by some, and a defender of liberal ideas by others, Napoleon is a name that plays a big role in history. His conquering of much of Europe spread ideals that would become important for the democracy that we have today in many countries. So Europe has now roughly returned to how it looked like before the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, but with some pretty big changes. Russia conquered all of Finland from Sweden in part of the Napoleonic Wars called the Finnish War. Sweden compensated for part of their loss of Finland by annexing Norway, forming a personal union between the two. This was the last war that Sweden has participated in until today. In France, the Bourbons have yet again restored the power, and France is yet again a monarchy. The Holy Roman Empire was dissolved in 1806, and as a replacement, German states together with Prussia formed the new German Confederation. In Italy, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies has been formed as a sovereign state, and Austria gained some land in northern Italy. Prussia gained some German territory, and Britain took control over Hanover. The Ottoman Empire continues its decline, losing more territory to Russia in another Russia-Turkish war, with Nicholas I of Russia leading a 100,000-man army assisting the Greeks in their war for independence. Greece got its independence from the Ottomans in 1829, a great blowback to the Turks. Another nation getting its independence is Belgium, through the Belgian Revolution in 1830. In the same year, a second French Revolution happened, now overthrowing the King Charles X, and establishing a constitutional monarchy, where the king does not have all the power himself. Another uprising occurs in 1830 in Poland against Russia, but this one fails, and Poland loses all the amount of autonomy they had enjoyed before. Denmark is involved in the First Schleswig War with Prussia and the German Confederation since 1848, concerning who was the territory of Schleswig-Holstein's rightful owner. The war did result in a Danish victory, but a second Schleswig War would come only 12 years later, where Denmark had to cede the territories they got to keep by winning the first war, Schleswig, Holstein and Lauenburg, to Prussia and Austria. Another thing that happened in 1848 was yet another French Revolution, this time removing monarchy entirely, creating the Second French Republic. Oh, how much more pleasing to the eye the map of Europe has become. The German people has finally, after years of division into tiny states, formed a single nation, the German Empire. This was not easy for them to do. Prussia was the largest and most powerful of the German states, thus it was obviously them who would be the ones to unify Germany. However, other nations opposed this. France, which had done yet another swap of government, was now the Second French Empire under Emperor Napoleon III, nephew of the Napoleon, since his successful coup to seize power in 1852. France was not positive towards the idea of German unification, as they would rather see them split up, easier to handle in case of war than a mighty empire, united. Therefore the Franco-Prussian War broke out in 1870, but resulted in a German victory, the fall of the Second French Empire, formation of the, can you guess, Third French Republic, and the formation of the German Empire, claiming Gott mit uns, God is with us. Wilhelm I was crowned as the Kaiser, or Emperor, and Otto von Bismarck, who had been a great supporter of the German unification, as Chancellor. Italy had also seen unification between its many separate states, together forming the nation of Italy. The fight had been led by Giuseppe Garibaldi. Vittorio Emanuele II was placed on the throne, a man that had been the king of Sardinia before the unification. The Habsburg monarchy became the nation of Austria-Hungary in 1867. This was done much to recognize Hungarian ethnicity to be of equal worth to the Austrian ethnicity, but it was also done to make governing the enormous, not to mention enormously culturally divided empire a bit easier, prolonging its survival. First thing one may notice in the map of Europe in the year 1900 is the several new states emerging on the Balkan Peninsula. This is where things are really starting to look bleak for the rapidly declining Ottoman Empire, once one of the world's most powerful empires. What happened on the Balkan Peninsula between the years 1875 and 1878 is known as the Great Eastern Crisis. Uprisings, wars, and international meddling of other European powers was shaking the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the many peoples of the Balkan Peninsula had had to live under Turkish rule, and the Ottomans had been too strong to be completely pushed out of the European mainland. With its growing weakness, however, this was the chance everyone had been waiting for. People of several of the Jewish states had started rising up against Ottoman rule, supported by European powers eager to see the Turks lose more influence in Europe. This ended with the Turks losing territories to the now independent states Romania, Montenegro, and Serbia. Bulgaria was also formed, but stayed under Ottoman control as a subject. Furthermore, the Ottomans lost the island Cyprus to the British. Another nation gaining its independence was Luxembourg, being released from the Netherlands in 1890. Apart from the wars with the Ottomans, the other European powers had actually managed to stay at peace with each other, but this, however, was soon to change. The year is 1925, and Europe is trying to recover from the most devastating war in its history yet. The First World War, going on from 1914 to 1918, had claimed more than 41 million lives, civilian and military together, and many of the beautiful landscapes of Europe had been devastated by the unprecedented scale of bombardment never seen before in history. This war did not happen all of a sudden. In fact, everyone had expected a war to break out between the European powers, the question only being when. Years of arms racing on all sides and rising nationalism made everyone once again eager to see their country fight for their future and hopefully win. The paintings of the battles of the glorious past wars made men want to test their skill on the battlefield and participate in the amazing, grand, glorious show that war was. This was what most young men expected when they were marching through their cities to the battlefields, surrounded by cheering crowds, expecting them to be home by Christmas, as the leaders had proclaimed that they would. By not being at war with each other for some time now, the European nations had started to forget the horrors of war. When the soldiers arrived in the muddy, blood and rat-filled trenches, this became a shocking awakening for the illusion of what they had thought the war was going to be like. New modern weapons, the machine gun, the poison gas, and the roaring artillery, together with the horrible life conditions in the trench, created a hell on earth that lasted 4 years. Outbreak of war was a result of the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of the Austro-Hungarian Empire by a Serbian nationalist, and when Serbia refused Austro-Hungarian demands for compensation, they were declared war upon. Russia, who was allied with Serbia, was not late to respond and declared war on Austria-Hungary, which was allied to Germany, which declared war on Russia. But Russia was allied with France, so they joined against the Germans too. The point-shaped border between France and Germany was heavily fortified and called the Maginot Line, so the Germans chose to go around it through Belgium. Britain didn't allow this and declared war on the Germans. Europe was now engulfed in war. The German Empire and its allies, Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, together formed the Central Powers. The war had been going well for them in the beginning, with the Germans almost reaching Paris and defending against the outdated, disorganized and badly equipped Russians on the Eastern Front. However, the German navy was far inferior to that of the British Empire, who chose to blockade Germany, preventing any supplies and trade goods from reaching them through the sea, making the war effort hard and civilian conditions even harder. In 1918, after the failed last offensive, the German army was beaten and decimated, and the entire country was starving. Despite having beaten the Russians on the Eastern Front, when America decided to join the war against Germany, the war was practically lost. In Russia, the situation had been bad already before the war. After a humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, which also had been devastating for Russia, life conditions had become almost unbearable for the Russian people. Mass starvation, inequality and oppression led the people to revolution in 1917, when they demanded food, equal rights and an exit from the war with Germany, and the abdication of the Russian Tsar Nicholas II. It succeeded, and a new Russia was formed, putting an end to the several hundred-year-old Russian Empire and the rule of an absolute monarch. Instead, a republic was formed, but the leader of the new Russia, Alexander Kerensky, continued the fight against Germany against the will of the people, but now the people had had enough of war. So a new revolution started, the October Revolution, and it overthrew the republic, and the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power, forming the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, later the Soviet Union, making peace with Germany and ceding large territories to them. This era saw the end of several European empires. The German Empire became the highly indebted and ruined Weimar Republic, and the Russian Empire ceased to exist, instead becoming a communist dictatorship. The Ottoman Empire became Turkey, and Austria-Hungary finally collapsed due to its inability to keep control of its many culturally diverse regions. Europe was determined to never let a war like this happen ever again, but one man with great ambitions and lust for revenge against the countries who had ruined his Germany had totally different plans. In the year 1950, Europe has gone through two extremely devastating and brutal conflicts. After the First World War, Britain and France, who had been victorious in finally winning the horrendous trench war on the Western Front, wanted to secure the future peace and stability of Europe by making Germany pay for the many dead and wounded on the Western Front. Blaming them almost entirely for the war, they issued heavy debts on them in form of war reparations and restricted their army to a maximum of 100,000 men in the Versailles Treaty. Furthermore, they were not allowed to have any air force, and the Rhineland, a region in Germany closest to the French border, was to be demilitarized. Germany should not have any troops stationed there. Germany itself was in ruins. Heavily indebted, inflation grew, along with the unemployment and poverty. People begged in the streets. The Germans started to become desperate. Who was to blame for this great misfortune? A man with a hot temper had the answer. The Jews seemed to be the ones least affected by the crisis. And why was this? This man started to become popular, and in the year 1934 he had seized power of the entire country and was now known as Führer and Reichschancellor Adolf Hitler. The Allies wanted to do all they could to prevent another war from erupting, and compromised a lot with Hitler, giving him much of the land he demanded for Germany. After having broken most parts of the Versailles Treaty, Hitler finally demanded the city of Danzig from Poland, but now the other European countries had had enough, and Poland refused. On the 9th of September 1939, Germany started the invasion of Poland under the codename Fall Weiss. Hitler justified his war much by his proclamation that Germany and the German people needed Lebensraum, living space, something that the East had a lot of. He viewed ethnic Germans as a superior human race, which all other races must bow down to. Italy had also become a dictatorship in 1922 under dictator Benito Mussolini, and they helped Germany in the war, mainly in northern Africa. Fascism had also gained a strong foothold in Spain, and after a bloody civil war, Francisco Franco, leader of the Spanish Falangist Party, became the new absolute leader of the country. He would continue to reign until his death in 1975. Spain had suffered greatly from the civil war, and therefore Franco did not want to join Hitler in the war, despite similar ideologies. Hitler went on conquering France, going around the Maginot Line through Belgium. He also took Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark and Norway. Sweden was neutral in the entire war. He wanted to conquer Britain to end the war, but he did not achieve air superiority, which was crucial to the operation, so he turned his attention towards giant Russia. The Soviet Union had done a bad job trying to invade Finland, taking huge losses. Hitler noted this and thought it would be an easy picking. However, he did the same mistake as Napoleon. Only 20 kilometers from Moscow, after having completely rolled over the Soviet army, the invasion came to a halt. A Soviet counterattack, plus the biting cold of the Russian winter that they were, like Napoleon's army, not prepared for, pushed the shocked Germans back. After a bloody struggle on the Eastern Front, and Britain and the US, who had joined the war after being attacked by Hitler's ally Japan at Pearl Harbor, had opened up a Western Front by invading northern France, the Germans were on the defensive. Over 60 million people had died in this cruel war before it came to an end in 1945, finally, after 5 years of fighting. The Soviets took Berlin, and after this the thing that the Western Allies had feared the most happened. Instead of liberating the former German-occupied countries from Nazi rule, the Soviets took them for themselves, to spread their influence further and force communism on these countries. Europe was now divided in East and West, with the Iron Curtain to the center, dividing democracy and totalitarianism. The Soviet-occupied countries are under strict Moscow rule, although with some autonomy to be gained later when the Warsaw Pact was formed. Eastern occupied Germany was made into the DDR, standing for the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, meaning German Democratic Republic, ironically, as usually no communist country had any democracy other than perhaps which communist party man would lead the country. Furthermore, Berlin, the former German capital, was divided in East and West Berlin. The western part was controlled by the Western powers, and they got access through it to air and railways. Yugoslavia was communist, but refused to take part in the Warsaw Pact. Finland had technically lost the war against the Soviet Union, having to cede large territories, but they got to keep their independence. They still existed as a sovereign nation, and the Soviet war goal was to annex the entirety of Finland. Because Spain had chosen not to actively enter the war, and not join the Axis, though cooperating with them, Spain was now the last fascist country in Europe, now with all the other former fascist countries being replaced with different governments. 1975. The Cold War is still going on between the Communist East and the Democratic West. Both had enormous arsenals of nuclear weapons that could annihilate the entire world many times over. Both sides are always ready, but who will press the button? Despite this threat, people are doing their best to live their daily lives and not think too much about the threat of death and destruction that constantly lies over them. The map of Europe does not change too much between the 50s and the 70s, but some minor changes happen. In the year 1950, Austria was still divided in occupation zones between the Allies, but now they have been reborn, so to speak. A bit further down south, Albania decides to leave the Warsaw Pact in 1968. Cyprus also gets independence from Britain in the year 1960. In Spain, the several-decade-long dictatorship under Francisco Franco finally comes to an end when he dies in November 1975. A notable amount of people decide to escape the communist rule in the East in many different places. For example, the people in Berlin were divided by the Berlin Wall that the Soviets decided to construct to prevent people from escaping to the much more promising West. As a result, many families and relatives were separated from one another, unable to see each other. There were guards patrolling this wall 24/7 around the clock, shooting anyone who tried to escape. But this did not stop people from trying, digging tunnels under it or just trying to climb it. Many were killed, but many succeeded. The space race was one of the many competitions between the Eastern and Western powers. It was a matter of great prestige. The Soviets managed to put the first satellite in orbit around Earth in October 1957, Sputnik 1. This gained the Soviets a great amount of prestige, which was only to increase when they managed to launch the first form of life originating from Earth into space. Sputnik 2, carrying the dog Laika, was successfully launched in November 1957. But the greatest achievement of the Soviet space program was when cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man in space, when launched from Earth in 1961, and then safely, or as safely as possible, returning to Earth. The final prize to grab was the landing of a man on the moon, but this victory USA managed to claim, landing Neil Armstrong on the moon in 1969. Also, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s and 90s were to become very well distinct by cultural alterations, not least regarding music and clothing. The year 2000 was an important year. Not only was it a millennium shift, a great event, but it also marked the end of the most turbulent century in human history, the 20th century. The map has changed a lot. The without doubt biggest change is the collapse of the Soviet Union, which left a bunch of old countries now gaining independence. Germany is also whole again. The Berlin Wall was torn down by shearing masses of people in November 1989, reuniting friends and family. Although reunited with the East Germany, the differences between East and West can still be seen today, both in infrastructure but also populace and economy. The Soviet Union was finally officially dissolved in 1991, releasing Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania from communist rule. Furthermore, Czechoslovakia is divided in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Moldova also appears as a sovereign nation. In the region around Yugoslavia, the Yugoslav wars are going on since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. They will lead to the complete dissolution of the nation Yugoslavia into smaller states like Croatia, Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Serbia. From the ashes of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation rises, with Boris Yeltsin as the first prime minister and later Vladimir Putin. Now the Russian people are to experience something that they have never really seen before in their entire history: democracy. Other parties than the Communist Party were forbidden in the Soviet Union, but now several other parties have erupted, with Единая Россия, United Russia, as one of the most popular, with Vladimir Putin as their leader. The world is starting to become more and more globalized, with people being able to communicate with one another like never before through the invention of the internet, and ideas and culture is being spread worldwide. So here we are today, year 2018. Everything is calm, all of Europe is at peace, and borders are finally set in stone, never to change. Not really. You can hear my obvious sarcasm. Europe might not be as turbulent and war-ridden as it has been in the past, but there are conflicts going on still. The most notable perhaps being the one in Ukraine. From March 2014, the Donbas region has been occupied by pro-Russian separatists wanting to free themselves of Ukraine. The two oblasts, Donetsk and Luhansk, have proclaimed themselves as the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, DPR and LPR. There has been armed conflict as Ukraine is fighting these separatists. The uprisings followed Russia's annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in early 2014, and ever since Russia has supported the separatists, which many believe may be part of a bigger Russian plan to link up these territories with annexed Crimea. The fighting has been going back and forth since 2014, with casualties rising on both sides, and also many civilian lives being lost as a result of this war. A ceasefire was negotiated in 2015, but the effectiveness of this has not been too great, with occasional fighting going on every day. How this conflict will end is hard to say, as it's going on to this very day. And now the United States has, to Russia's vexation, decided to support Ukraine with supplies. In the Middle East at the same time, the radical Islamist state ISIS has been pushed back from most of its strongholds in the Syrian and Iraq area. In Asia, the tensions are growing more and more intense, as no diplomatic solution seems to be achievable between North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump. The world is holding its breath as rocket after rocket is being shot up by North Korea, and nuclear bomb tests seem to be going forward at a dangerous pace for a nation that's not allowed to perform such. Even China is starting to sanction North Korea as they see that they are a threat to the entire world. In November this year, it will be exactly 100 years since the end of the First World War, the Great War, which many believe would be the last one forever. It would be far from it. But since the Second World War, most of the ancient European nations have been unified in the European Union to keep good relations with one another, while rivalry and hostility between them has been replaced with friendship and perhaps a bit of friendly rivalry. If there will ever be another great war between the European nations remains to be seen, as the term World War III is still on everyone's minds, even though no one can know for sure what that would mean for the world. The change of Europe's borders have been enormous since the year 1700, and more changes will most likely come. With regions as Scotland in Britain and Catalonia in Spain fighting for independence, it's hard to say what the map will look like in 100 years. What do you think will happen in the future? Which nations will exist and which will not? Will there be worldwide peace? Will there be worldwide war and destruction? Please write a comment down below and let me know what you think. And thank you for watching this video. Goodbye.